What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Michael, directed by Antoine Fuqua and starring Jaafar Jackson as the King of Pop, Michael Jackson. This is only part one of the story, which takes us up to the late 80s, but the sequel has not actually been shot yet, so who knows if we'll see it or when we'll see it. But for now, let's stay focused on the movie that we have, which tackles the great heyday of the Jackson 5, as well as the explosive popularity of Michael Jackson's first few solo albums. While Michael's turbulent relationship with his father might form the backbone of most of the drama at play in the movie, in the end, this is a movie that is all about playing the hits, as the old expression goes, tackling the most popular highlights from the first half of Michael's life, like performing Billie Jean live at the Motown 25 event, but more on that in a bit. Put simply, this is a movie for die-hard Michael Jackson fans, and there are a lot of them at my theater last night. I saw it in IMAX up at the AMC in Lincoln Square, and people had actually brought boomboxes into the theater, and they were playing his music ahead of time and encouraging everybody to sing along, so they were amped up and ready to go. And then right before the movie started, Coleman Domingo just strolled on in. He plays Michael Jackson's father, Joe Jackson, and to put it mildly, he got the crowd worked up to a feverish state of anticipation. And as far as crowd reactions go, this is definitely one of those movies you're going to want to see, with a big, lively, insane crowd. There was this adorable little girl on my row, like halfway down, but she couldn't have been older than like 7 or 8. Obviously not alive during the great heyday of Michael Jackson, but for pretty much every single song, she would get up and just go fucking crazy and start dancing. And her parents were trying to pull her down and trying to physically restrain her, but much like the young Michael in this movie, who's having to learn not to move his feet around when he's recording, this little girl, you couldn't hold her back. So yeah, the crowd seemed to have an absolute blast. Overall, I would say the movie is very enjoyable. Perhaps it doesn't dig very deep, but if all you want to see is your favorite Michael Jackson songs performed on a big screen, it absolutely 100% delivers. Perhaps my only criticism would be where the movie chooses to end this part one of the story. I would have ended it right where Michael Jackson and Joe Jackson finally split up once and for all. It felt like the real emotional peak of the movie. The movie decides to go one concert further into 1988 with the release of his Bad album. Or maybe it was 1987 when the album came out. But if they had been taking my advice, I would have told them, start the next movie with the release of the Bad album. Because I feel like from Bad onward, it was a very different chapter in Michael Jackson's life. But apparently, there were a ton of reshoots on this movie. I didn't follow all the production details with a fine-tooth comb, but I know certain sequences had to be reshot in order to avoid going into some controversial terrain. This movie is not controversial in any way, shape, or form. In a lot of ways, it feels like this is the version of the story that Michael Jackson's family wants to have out there. I mean, it's Michael Jackson's nephew playing Michael Jackson. Jaafar is the son of Jermaine, but much like Michael Jackson's dance moves, this movie chooses to kind of tap dance around any subject matter that might be considered too controversial, apart from his ongoing battles with his father throughout his childhood and his eventual desire to go solo and break away from his father as his manager, which is all very well documented and very familiar to his diehard fans. And from what I gathered at my theater last night, Michael Jackson's diehard fans remain alive and well. But what surprised me was that the theater was not sold out. So maybe there are not quite as many diehard fanatics as there once were. I still think there's a very good chance that this might be the most popular musical biopic ever released, but not necessarily a guaranteed billion-dollar movie for Lionsgate. We'll have to see how the casual fans react. But as far as my own fandom goes, I can't remember a time from my childhood where Michael Jackson was not already the most popular entertainer on the planet. I was born in 1976, so I was 6 years old when the album Thriller was released, and I was 7 when the music videos for Beat It, Billie Jean, and Thriller all started getting played day and night on MTV. And we had just gotten cable in our house, and MTV was on all the time. And I can still vividly recall sitting next to my brother on the floor, and he'd already seen the music video at a friend's house a few days earlier. But when he saw the opening title card about the occult, he looked over at me and said, "We're about to watch Thriller." And I was like, huh? In any event, it was an earth-shattering experience. I cannot describe to you how cool it was watching that video from start to finish when you're 7 years old and very impressionable and kind of getting interested in pop music and horror movies and that sort of thing. But suddenly, John Landis and Michael Jackson, they just tore the universe wide open and showed what pop culture and entertainment could be. And there's a very good reason why that album went on to become the most popular, best-selling album of all time, because when you play it now, you're like, oh shit, it's not just Thriller, it's all these other songs on there as well. It's all killer, no filler, as the old expression goes. And one of my favorite childhood memories from this period was going over to my uncle's place where he had a Laserdisc player and a pull-down screen. And he actually had Laserdisc that had all the music videos from the Thriller album, a behind-the-scenes look at the making of those videos, as well as the Laserdisc for the Motown 25 Yesterday, Today, Forever concert that was put on in the spring of 1983. But my dad, my older brother, my little sister, and I stood in front of the screen watching the performance of Billie Jean at that concert. And when Michael Jackson does that fucking badass kick shit that he used to do, we were standing there trying to imitate him, trying to learn how to do it. Because right around this time, breakdancing was getting really popular. Movies like Breakin' and Beat Street were coming out, and everybody wanted to learn one or two moves that they could kind of have in their bag of tricks. But as I got a little older, I lost interest in a lot of Michael Jackson's new music, but I started getting really interested in the Jackson 5 because I was just obsessed with music from the late 60s and early 70s throughout high school. And I am thrilled and delighted and relieved that cell phones were not around back then, because in the early 90s, I would drive around playing Jackson 5 albums and trying to sing along to songs like Stop the Love You Save. Needless to say, you don't need to hear it from me, but I don't sing as well as like the 8-year-old Michael Jackson. But if footage of that of those attempts at singing those songs existed, I would never be able to show myself in public ever again. So this movie, this is all a long-winded way of saying this movie's tackling all the periods of Michael Jackson's life that I'm interested in, because I'm not really interested in the kind of the horrific late stage Michael Jackson kind of a celebrity persona that we all started to kind of recoil in horror from, where he would be testifying in court as like pieces of his face were falling off. I mean, he'd be like turned into something from a fucking horror movie. But in the early 80s, as a young impressionable kid, he was the coolest person on planet Earth, and definitely the most popular figure, most beloved figure of that era. So what works well in this movie and what does not? I'll say Jaafar Jackson gives the movie his all, but there are times where his performance feels more like a caricature as opposed to a character, where he's doing an impression of Michael Jackson that we're all familiar with, but maybe he doesn't go but so deep below the surface of the character. And there are some very sweet, moving, kind of affectionate scenes where we see his love of animals and him speaking very tenderly to children who are burn victims or suffering from cancer and things like that. So it definitely has a tender, heartfelt side. But this movie is not trying to give us some deep, rugged examination of Michael Jackson's soul. It wants everybody to have a really good time. So when it comes to the very personal, private parts of his life, this movie, once again, it just tap dances around all of that. And the way they address it in the movie, the family would just say, well, ever since you were born, we've known you were different, but your family loves you and we're here to protect you, and the outside world won't accept you for being different, but we're here to protect you. And that's about all the movie is willing to acknowledge. Plus, as we got deeper into the 80s, one of the reasons I stopped liking his music was that Michael Jackson started to increasingly become not an object of ridicule, but kind of a strange, bewildering figure where we didn't quite know what to make of him. As soon as I heard Eddie Murphy making fun of him in Delirious, I was like, oh, he's not a god. He's an individual, and he's an individual with flaws.
That's Michael's hooks, his sensitivity. That's what women be saying, Michael's just so sensitive. And they eat that shit up. Mike know too, he be using women in concerts. I seen Mike walk up to girls on the stage, be in the audience, he say, is it all right if I come down there and sing to you? And the women go, ah!
But as his life went on and it got increasingly strange, to outside observers, just kind of examining him from a distance, it got to be tough to be, a diehard fan. Also, his music, just his style, started to change as we got into the late 80s and early 90s. My sisters remained rabid fans, me less so. But what the movie captures really well is the creative process, like which artistic figures inspired Michael Jackson, and how did he go about creating like some of his legendary music videos for songs like Beat It or Billie Jean or Thriller. And that was where the movie really came to life, where it really gets into his love and affection for the work of Fred Astaire. Like there's this great scene on the set of Thriller where he reminds director John Landis, Fred Astaire always said, show the feet of the performers as they're dancing, otherwise you can't appreciate what they're doing. And it's a really good note. And when you watch these music videos, the camera's always pulling back where you can see their feet at work, because obviously Michael Jackson knew how to move his feet really, really well. And it was also interesting seeing him choreographing all the moves for Beat It, back when he basically moved almost like a serpent, but like seeing how he got the idea of everybody dancing in unison, so it's like a school of fish or a flock of birds, where it's really cool watching everybody moving at the same time. So I feel like that's where this movie really comes to life. And that's where director Antoine Fuqua is really showing off that he knows, at this point, he's a very seasoned veteran of directing movies. He's been directing movies for 25 years, made a lot of really gnarly movies like Training Day But here he's just trying to show, this is like the magic of creating a classic music video, and this is what Michael Jackson brought to the table. And if you want further evidence about Michael Jackson's love and affection for Fred Astaire, watch some of the dance sequences from Vincent Minnelli's The Bandwagon, and then compare them to the music video for Smooth Criminal. You're like, oh, you're remaking some of the best parts of The Bandwagon. But he was also a big fan of Charlie Chaplin, and there's a great scene where he's talking to a little boy about how he's a performer and he's a director, but he also writes songs. And obviously Michael Jackson really loved early classic Disney movies. He's always surrounded by stuffed animals of Mickey Mouse, or he's got all these kind of like children's books for Peter Pan, but it's the Peter Pan as adapted by Disney back in the day, where you start to see his obsession with a certain curvature to the nose and things like that. Like, this movie definitely does not shy away from the fact that he always thought his nose was a little too big. It looked a little bit too much like his father, and he wanted a more kind of elf-like appearance, and so on and so forth. But as much as we all might love those early classic songs by the Jackson 5 and Michael Jackson's early solo albums, it wouldn't be much of a movie if you didn't have some drama there. And so they lean all the way in on Joe Jackson and Coleman Domingo being a very stern, strict father, sometimes overbearing father when it comes to teaching his boys how to sing and dance in unison and basically putting this group together. But he is absolutely merciless. And this is when the movie pulls no punches, where anytime Michael kind of pushes back, like, I'm tired, or I want to go to school, or whatever, I mean, out comes the belt, and it's just a different era. The Michael Jackson household was a pretty tough place to be in the 1960s, but it's tough to argue with the results, because obviously they became big, giant fucking superstars in a very short period of time. But over time, when Joe Jackson's trying to continue to basically maintain like a tight-fisted control over everything Michael does, that's where the real drama of the movie starts to evolve. And probably one of the most entertaining scenes in the movie is when we get to see Miles Teller in the role of John Branca, and he used to work with Bob Dylan and Neil Diamond and a lot of other and the Beach Boys and a lot of other big figures. But there's this great scene in this huge conference room around this giant table where all these execs are talking about all the various services they're going to offer to Michael Jackson once he goes solo and that sort of thing. But Michael Jackson kind of zeroes in on Miles Teller's character, because Miles Teller, he appears to be the only executive in the room who actually does love music, but also appears to be the only executive in the room who's not just going to be a constant yes man, who actually will speak in an honest, blunt fashion with Michael Jackson. And Michael's just like, all right, you're my guy, and the very first thing we're going to do is fire my father. And they're like, well, how would you like us to do it? And he's like, quickly. And so there are some good dramatic scenes, and I think all credit goes, or a lot of the credit goes to screenwriter. Hang on, it's John Logan. Yeah, John Logan, who's written some good movies in the past. And John Logan is a seasoned pro when it comes to writing screenplays. He's worked with Martin Scorsese. He's worked with Ridley Scott. He worked with a lot of big directors, and he is doing everything in his power to try to write a story with like actual story construction and a legit beginning, middle, and end. But it's a very tough job for a writer to write a story that's compelling when you're pausing every couple seconds to play a song in full. And not all the songs are played in full, but a lot of them are played in full. And when you're doing a musical biopic, the question always is, how much of the music should you include? Because that's what people are here for. They want to hear and they want to see all the incredible concerts and that sort of thing. But if you're doing like a 3 or 4 minute song and you've only got like 2 hours in which to tell your story, you're obviously you're condensing the periods, or you're condensing the moments where you actually have dialogue and exposition and character development and that sort of thing. So I would say the movie is largely successful, but not completely successful at kind of walking that tightrope of balancing dramatic needs versus the musical needs of the story they're telling. And I would say Jaafar Jackson is largely successful in his portrayal of Michael, but not completely successful in his portrayal of Michael. First and foremost, he's just a little bit too old. Jaafar Jackson's 30 years old now. And I know this movie got delayed and postponed a few times due to some of the strikes in Hollywood, but when he first got cast in the role, he was probably in his mid-20s and he looked perfect. But once you start getting up to 30, Michael Jackson had a very specific look back in the early 1980s, and you can age out of that window very quickly. But in spite of his being just a tad too old to play the part, he's definitely got the moves, and no one can deny that. In particular, during the scene where he's choreographing everything for the Beat It video, like, God damn, dude, like, you really do dance like fucking Michael Jackson. And there are a lot of people who have tried and failed to imitate Michael Jackson over the years, because when Michael was young and in his prime and he would be spinning around and going up on his toes and grabbing his crotch and that sort of thing, nobody had ever seen anything like that before or since. It was a singular style of performance, which is why he became like the greatest pop star who ever lived. So I would say Jaafar Jackson is doing everything in his power to be an approximation of his legendary uncle, and I would say he gets the job done. But no one's gonna come away from this movie and say, "Oh, Jaafar Jackson, what a great thespian, what an incredible actor," because there are just too many scenes where it just feels like he's imitating his uncle as opposed to becoming his uncle. But there are some good scenes where you really feel that he's he's gotten inside the skin of his famous uncle. And every once in a while, he'll give us a really good scene. Like toward the end of the movie, when the Jacksons are doing their final tour together, there's this great moment where right before they go on stage for their encore, Michael just kind of throws his arms around the necks of his brother and like tells his brothers that he loves them. And it's just a very tender, sweet, heartfelt moment. And I feel like that performance and the subsequent split with Joe, that was the emotional high of the movie. And that's where the movie should have stopped and say, like, part 2 coming in 2028 or whatever the case might be. The movie kind of overstays its welcome and plays Bad in full. And it probably doesn't help that I was never a fan of Bad. Like, basically Michael Jackson's catalog from Bad onward, I was indifferent to it, in spite of the fact that Martin Scorsese directed the music video for Bad. And once again, if you decide to end your movie with like a 4 or 5 minute song played in its entirety, where there are no dramatic stakes of any kind, where the story's already been resolved, everything's been wrapped up, like the story's over, but they just decide to give us that song, what I would have recommended is either cut it or have the closing credits play over that song. And that would have felt more like, oh, well, you can stay and watch the performance if you want to, or you can leave. So overall, I would say this is a very enjoyable evening at the movies. It's a very entertaining evening at the movies. But as far as filmmaking is concerned and storytelling is concerned, everybody involved understood the assignment. And their assignment was play the hits and send everybody out into the streets with a big smile on their face. But it's not trying to dig much deeper than that. So if you're looking for like the real, raw, true story of Michael Jackson, you're not going to find it here. But if you've ever been a Michael Jackson fan at any time in your life, a fan of any of the periods of his life, then obviously, yeah, go see Michael. You're going to have a blast. But I think that's all I've got to say about this movie. So if you enjoyed this video, But I think that's all I've got to say about Michael. So if you enjoyed this video, remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Hope everybody has a great weekend at the movies, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.